Morning in our look at 1 Corinthians 15, and I hope that you are ready for a little bit of a different kind of service. But I want to begin by asking you the question that Paul said that he had heard before. What happens when the dead are raised? What kind of body will they have? Now, I want to tell you this morning that I am not a real farmer like my grandparents were, especially my mother's parents. My granddad on my mom's side raised corn and wheat and cattle and pigs and all of those things. And on my father's side, my grandfather and grandmother planted one of the most incredible terraced gardens that you will ever see. It was a natural hill that they'd created, a terraced garden. They were ahead of their time, and they had incredible produce that resulted from their hard work, and we were the recipient of many of their efforts because we would eat Sunday dinner, the evening meal, with my dad's parents, and there were always things that Grandma had canned or that she had picked fresh from the garden that day that made their appearance on the dinner table. Now you can imagine, as children, we should have been way more impressed than we were. Lots of our response to some of those things were, yuck, do I really have to eat that? Not knowing the effort that had gone into creating that meal from a seed. You see, because real gardeners use seeds. There should be a picture. Let's hope. Let's see if it happens. Should be a picture of seeds. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I wouldn't be able to name any of those if they didn't have the words underneath them. And if you're far enough back, you may not be able to see the words. And you might not know what those seeds are. But I can tell you for a fact that if you saw those seeds just outlined around, you would have no idea what that seed might produce. It's going to be a plant of some kind, but what it would look like and the fruit that it would bear. Jesus said in this particular, Paul writes in this particular passage that some may ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body will they come? And he used this image of seeds. He said, how foolish that you would ask. What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. When you sow, you do not plant the body that will be, but just a seed, perhaps of wheat or something else. But God gives it a body as he has determined, and to each kind of seed he gives its own body. All flesh is not the same. Men have one kind of flesh, animals have another, birds another, and fish another. There are also heavenly bodies, and there are earthly bodies. But the splendor of the heavenly body is of one kind, and the splendor of the earthly bodies is another. The sun has one kind of splendor, the moon another, and the stars another. And stars differ from stars in splendor. Now, Paul is preaching from the obvious perspective that he believes in the resurrecting work of God. In Acts chapter 26, as Paul appears before Agrippa, he says, why should it be thought incredible by you that God raises the dead? And so he answers the question, what you sow does not come to life unless it dies. That the seed, Jesus said in another place, very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. I hope you get the picture of the power of the resurrection. And Jesus talked about his own life and his own death in those terms as well. Charles Spurgeon, the great preacher, said, dear friends, if such be death, it be but a sowing, let us have done with all faithless, hopeless, graceless sorrow. Ray Stedman stated two things are true. Death is necessary and essential for there to be a resurrection. And the body that emerges from the seed that dies is different from the one that was planted. I am not the kind of farmer or gardener that my grandparents were, or perhaps that even some of you are. I have not had the guts yet to plant a seed in the ground. I did years ago, and I was not very successful. So these days, I buy the actual plant and start from that. So I know what it's going to be. I know what it's supposed to produce. And that gives me some solace and some comfort, but I don't always believe that it's going to be a guarantee that it will produce. But here's what I do know, that if I planted a seed of corn, it's not going to produce a cucumber. If I plant an acorn, it will not produce a dogwood or an elm tree. If I plant strawberry seeds, I don't expect to reap grapes. God said, I've given each thing a body as I have determined. And so those seeds, they may look similar, but the plant that comes from them, what they produce is going to be different in color and texture and size and the kind of vegetable or fruit that comes from it. And Jesus uses this to picture the resurrection, that the seed, the body that is buried in the ground will be raised as something new. And we're going to talk a lot more about what that something new looks like and is supposed to be. But here's what I know. I know that when Jesus was resurrected, after they buried him in the ground and he remained for 3 days, that when he came out of that tomb in his resurrected body, that people who knew him prior to his death didn't immediately recognize him. Now some would say, well, they didn't because they just didn't expect to see him. But I think that Jesus had very identifiable features, and if you have lived and spent time with him and shared meals with him, you would recognize him. I can't always recall the names of people I have known for a long time, but when I see their face, I recognize them, no matter how many changes have occurred with the passage of time. When Mary was approached by Jesus in the garden, she didn't know it was Jesus. She thought it was a gardener until he spoke her name. And then immediately her heart was moved, and she knew that it was Jesus. When Jesus appeared to his disciples, they weren't convinced at first until he showed them the scars and the place where the spear had pierced his side. And as two men walked on the Emmaus road and talked about what had just happened in the week before, and Jesus came and walked alongside of them and explained everything about the redemptive story from the Old Testament up to his life, they didn't recognize that it was Jesus until he broke bread with them. And immediately their eyes were opened, and they said, "Didn't our hearts burn within us when he shared with us the words of God?" It was Jesus, but his resurrected body differed from his crucified one. One person said, the promise for us is that we will have some kind of continuity of our personhood, our personality, our unique individuality after death in the new resurrection body. That the seed will produce something unique, but it will come and be related to that seed. And so Paul just goes a little bit farther, just so people aren't confused. He says, are we the same as animals? People have one kind of flesh, animals have another, birds another, and fish another. Paul says, absolutely not. That when he's talking about the resurrection of people, that is a very different conversation than talking about the bodies of animals and of those kinds of things, because we alone have the power of reason and the power to relate to God. We alone were breathed a living spirit, a living soul made in the image of God, and animals are not. I don't know if all dogs go to heaven. I know some of us hope that at least our dogs will end up in heaven. I'm not sure I've ever met a cat that will be there. Maybe you have. Sorry, cat lovers. Maybe you have. But I'm not sure. But I'll tell you something. I kind of have a cringe reflex when I hear people talk about animals in people language, like adoption. Sorry if you have. We did. Our dog is from the Humane Society. But we purchased the dog from the Humane Society. We did not adopt the dog from the Humane Society. You can disagree with me, but my dog, as much as I love her, is not one of my people. She is not my child, though she sometimes thinks she is and acts like she might be one of them. I care about her. If something would happen to her, I would miss her. But she is not my best friend. That is reserved for people, for a person. She is not one of my kids. She is very intelligent, but she has not acquired human language up to this point, and I don't believe that she will, though my mother thinks that her dog does talk to her and communicate. That's a whole other story. I love Roxy. She will not be buried in a pet cemetery. It's just not going to happen. I will not stuff her when she dies, and if I do, call me on it, because she's not a person. If I hit her with my car accidentally, I will not be guilty of manslaughter, nor do I think I should be, because we are different. And the hope I have as someone made in the image of God is different than any other creature in the created order. That when God made people, man and woman, he gave them authority and dominion over the creatures of the earth. And so we are not equals. We are not the same. Love your pet with all your heart and all that you want to, but you're not the same. And we shouldn't talk about them as if they are, because we take away from the dignity and the uniqueness and the splendor and the wonder and the fearfulness of how God has made us. And Psalm 8, a little lower than the angels. And yet he is mindful of us and loves us. And then he goes on to say, even the heavenly bodies are different than the earthly bodies. The sun and the moon, different. A difference in splendor, and in the moon, a reflection of the light of the sun. The stars in their uniqueness that we can see, from with our eyes, but their brilliance, each one unique and different in its own way. And the splendor of who we are, created in the image of our Maker, is different than any other part of the creation. And I would encourage you to embrace that. Because when I talk about the resurrection hope, when I talk about my hope in Jesus, it's my hope that each one of us in this place will have a relationship with God, a face-to-face with Jesus, that when we go into the ground, when the seed of this earthly body is buried, that we know that by the glorious power and the promise of God, that we will be resurrected and we will be clothed in a new body, and it will be wondrous and glorious and connected to this earthly body, but transformed and changed into the glory, by the glory and the power of our Maker. Think about that as we come and we continue to sing and we worship together. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And God created you with purpose and for a purpose. And your destiny in Christ is resurrection. It's the hope of our faith.
I'm not sure you can sing this song sitting, so stand with me.